She had woken up again. She had come out of a dream where everything was black, so when opening her eyes in the dark hospital room, she had the unpleasant feeling of still being in the nightmare. She forced herself to open her heavy eyelids and accustom the eyes to the darkness. The ceiling and walls reflected a faint bluish light. She clutched in her hands the sheets and the pillow, feeling sweat down her neck, the hair stuck to her forehead, and the heated breaths continuously coming from her nostrils and mouth. She had vomited a lot, and her hot breath carried a faint, rancid smell. Her sweaty body let out a kind of sweet, greasy odor, like that of a wild carnivore who had just caught its prey. It was then that she came to the realization that she was still alive.
Why am I still alive? I've lost my dearest friend. I could have reached out and helped her, but instead I just watched. Now I'm here like an animal crouching in the dark, holding its breath. I'm still alive. I survived.
On the ceiling were gray stains, perhaps due to some water leak, and in the thin cracks rusted bits of metal peaked. The darkness in that hospital room was putting a strain on her nerves. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Golden Heart, Golden Ring, by Hirohiko Araki, Shotaro Miya, and Giichi Otsuka. Capitolo 3. Who knows how much time had passed when the lights came back. When she came to, Coniglio found herself surrounded by a large number of men.
Are you all right?
The policeman and members of the rescue team spoke to her. Someone had patted her on the shoulder, pointed out the exit, then gone back to talking loudly with his colleagues and other uniformed men in frenzied activity. Still, for Coniglio, sitting on the ground with an empty stare near Winona, who by now had lost all human resemblance, all that commotion coming from those men with reddened faces seems to belong to a different reality, another country which had nothing to do with her. When she left the hotel lobby, supported by one of them, she suddenly turned around to look. This was a place she knew well. For more than 2 months, she had walked in there almost every day, had exchanged some words with newly arrived guests, had carried back and forth dozens of suitcases, and sometimes she had felt like talking to her mother, which made her approach the phone booth. But in the end, for some reason or another, she had never made it. It had been a brief period. There had been no other place where she had felt more at ease than Hotel Mondo Aria's lobby. And now, that place had turned into a nightmare. On the sofa, the bluish-faced corpses of a couple seemed to lean into one another. Tumbled onto the reception counter was the body of one of the attendants. Further ahead, the crushed one of an elderly gentleman who must have been slammed hard against the wall. From under the fallen chandelier, white feet stuck out, and the floor was flooded with a pool of dark blood. From that blood, she could still make out wisps of purple smoke rising like some smoke signal, which dissipated in the air. Too many faces, too much blood, too many legs and arms, too many dead. One of the rescue team members near Coniglio could no longer bear that blood-curdling sight, and had started to vomit onto the floor.
Don't throw the scene! Get out!
Someone shouted with anger. In that moment, she became painfully aware of the blaring sound of the sirens, the blinding flashes which shone from all over the place, the men's yells, the clamor of curious onlookers. She heard the shrill voice of a woman, probably a journalist, bemoaning how she couldn't see a thing. And then again noise, so much noise. A deluge of noise suddenly poured on her. And finally she came to notice the tears, which had kept flowing from her eyes.
Why am I not dead as well?
Shortly after, she had been brought onto a water ambulance and taken to one of the city's hospitals. In the city of Venezia, wheeled vehicles aren't allowed. The use of cars and motorcycles is forbidden, and because of this, there are no ambulances or other emergency vehicles on wheels.
If you hadn't been a witness of the incident, I could have sent you home straight away.
Laughed the handsome young doctor who had been given the task of checking up on her. Naturally, it was unthinkable that they would let her go home so easily. On her medical records, they had written that the patient is in a severe state of shock and that she needs absolute rest for a certain period of time. Afterwards, she had been moved to the top floor of that old hospital. Just like the young doctor had said, Coniglio was in a condition of impeccable health. Her hospitalization, in short, had only been used to allow the police to question her in complete peace. As a matter of fact, less than an hour had passed since 2 police investigators had shown up, a young one and a middle-aged one, with an extraordinary resemblance to Lieutenant Columbo from the TV show, raincoat and all. Even the young one seemed like someone she had already seen somewhere, but perhaps it was all in her head. The inquiries which Lieutenant Columbo made during that visit were of a surprising simplicity. He wanted to know what had happened at the hotel. That was it. This single matter repeated ad nauseum in a string of countless variations.
Where were you? Why were you there? Did you see anyone who looked suspicious?
And so on. Reading between the words of such repetitive queries, she had figured that the police had absolutely nothing to go on to resolve this case. She could have had no idea how many people were victims of that massacre, but one thing alone was clear to her. It must have surely been something big. While answering Columbo's pedantic questions, the memory of that blonde guy crossed her mind for a moment. The one clad in moss green she had seen at the hotel lobby. Him, with that strange purple creature who stood behind him, that seemed out of a superhero comic book. And yet, she said nothing. She was unable to explain the reason for this even to herself. Actually, Coniglio had no idea what had happened at the hotel lobby. Neither she wanted to know. When trying to remember, the first thing that came to her mind was the smiling face of her friend Winona.
Have you already found a substitute for Leoni?
She had said that, tapping her on the shoulder, and then she had laughed. Her dear friend's last laugh. Every time she remembered, she felt something tighten inside, a sharp pain, a heavy weight on her heart.
I could have helped her.
She thought.
And instead, I couldn't do anything.
She felt the weight of remorse and clenched her fist.
And yet I survived. Why? Why only me?
Coniglio was lying on the bed. Next to her chest, the cure briskly wiggled its nose. With tiny steps, it moved toward her face, and right under the chin, stretched its muzzle to touch her with the mouth in something like a kiss. The small blue gemstones on the backs of its paws shone. Coniglio knew full well the answer to the question she kept asking.
It's him. It was this creature who saved my life.
Almost as if capable of understanding the whispers of this girl's soul, the cure turned its snout up towards Coniglio's face and nodded its head in semblance of an affirmative answer. It happened roughly when Coniglio was finishing elementary school. The most tomboyish girl in the area had turned into a young lady, even if this expression in itself seems like a contradiction. At that point, she was no longer fighting with the bullies of the neighborhood, not going around playing games that made her return home with her clothes torn to shreds. Her hair was a lot longer. She looked like a random girl, like any other. No, calling her a random girl like any other would be making a mistake. If anyone called her on the street, she'd greet back with a magnificent smile, and it wasn't just 1 or 2 boys who had a crush on her. And yet, during elementary school, Coniglio had always been a lonely child. After school, she would go straight home and close herself in her room, reading until late at night. Nancy Drew, Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie's detective novels. Or she would look at fashion magazines or reread comic books with the adventure of Tintin to no end. The reasons that led her to retreat into her shell were 2. One was the parents' divorce. They decided to live separately when Coniglio was about to start elementary school. She didn't know the reason behind it. When she was younger, they all went together to watch sci-fi films at the cinema, from Spielberg or similar, and occasionally they even went to watch the game at the stadium. However, at some point, for some reason, her parents had stopped talking to each other, and the only thing she could remember was how her older brother had bent over backwards trying to patch things up between the two. in vain. In the end came the divorce, and the result was that the two siblings, known in the neighborhood for being inseparable, had to live in different houses. Looking back at things now, it's not like it had been such an unusual thing. After high school, when she had started doing some odd jobs in the grocery store or in some fast food place, she came to realize the number of families divided by divorce was actually quite high. Yet at the time, when she was still going to elementary school, for Coniglio, her parents' divorce had been a blow that had sent her entire world upside down. Thinking better, it wasn't the fact that Dad and Mom were living separately that was a motive for shock. In her family, as often happens, both parents worked. The father held a key position at a medium-sized brokerage firm. The mother was deputy manager of a large car dealership. They met by chance. They started being together without any particular reason. They probably got married by sheer inertness. And then the children had come. If she told this interpretation, her mother would probably have smoke coming out of her ears in rage. The truth is, however, that day after day the hearts of these two extremely busy people had ceased communicating. In the end, a story a bit too much like so many others. Thinking about it, in hindsight, the biggest problem that the divorce had brought was the fact that she had to live away from her older brother. It was him who had always taken care of Coniglio when she came from school. It was him who heated the stew, or whatever meal their mother left before leaving, and who ate with her. It was him who sang with his rough English the songs of whichever rock band he was fond of at the time. Her family time was essentially all the time she spent with her brother, and he would never be there again. Without her brother, the home gave a strong feeling of emptiness. Indeed, just like the hotel rooms after a guest's departure. And her, until her mother's return, spent the time in a way that could have been described as dull, going back and forth through those empty rooms, like someone searching for the last puzzle piece, and before realizing it, she ended up searching for where her brother's presence could be. She felt very troubled that, no matter what she did, she could never get used to that life with her mother. The second reason was her stand, the cure. It had been during physical education, in middle school, when her best friend had scratched her knee. Coniglio told someone about the cure for the first time.
You probably can't see it, but when I approach him like this with my hand, the wound heals before your eyes.
It was her biggest secret. She had disclosed it only because she considered her a close friend. From Coniglio's point of view, it was a small show of friendship.
It will be our secret, only yours and mine,
she had whispered in an ear, and then bade the cure to lick her graze. The creature looked around and licked the wound, as if it found it to be a very funny thing.
Here, now it's all patched up,
she had told afterwards, bringing up her smiling eyes to her friend's face. But what she saw was a horrified look and an expression of pure terror.
Thanks, Coniglio. But now stop it!
And while she said it, her friend's voice was shaking.
And me thinking I was doing something nice.
Observing the friend who was running back to class, she somewhat regretted what she had done, especially because she considered her a friend she cared about. She gained the courage to confide in her. But the school environment isn't very agreeable with letting such a story end with mere regret. Before the end of the day, all throughout the school there was talk about Coniglio's mysterious ability, which her friend deemed revolting. Among those who knew Coniglio since childhood had come forth Connie l'Immortale, who always returned home without a scratch, regardless of how many beatings she took, and thus she became Connie la Strega. And it was only a matter of time for the adjectives joined to her name to take increasingly nastier forms. Her classmates had started openly avoiding her, and the circle of her closest friends, including the girl she had healed, too had begun to keep their distance. The friends with whom she usually spent break time would all disappear from their seats as soon as the bell rang, and whenever she tried to make plans to go out shopping or something, no one would go. At first, Coniglio didn't quite understand what was happening. She had never thought her power would scare someone, and even tried to find an excuse in the fact that, being unable to see it, They wouldn't ever think the cure was that cute. Still, the name of witch, with which she had been branded with, would never leave her up until the end of high school. The only thing which a high school life filled with misery had taught her was that people always fear that which they do not know, even if it might turn out to be something good. This had made her feel very poorly, and the only one who she could have asked for advice, her brother, was now no longer with her. It probably had been these two reasons, happening together during one of the most delicate moments of growing up, that ended up radically changing Coniglio. She had stopped trying to hang out with friends, and had started to close herself in her room. To whomever talked to her, she seemed the usual beaming girl of always. She had kept going to school, almost as some sort of statement, and during the occasional jobs, she always committed to the maximum. However, she no longer tried to open her heart to someone. She had started building a wall around herself and disguised it with smiles which prevented others from noticing. The magical white bunny continued to stand by her, but she never again asked it to use its powers on others. She didn't want to see a horrified look like the one she saw in her friend ever again. Like this, she started spending her time in the empty, brotherless house, in the company of her small white rabbit that no one could see. A small, empty, locked house. Not even the mother could tell what was going on in Coniglio's heart. At night, the hospital became submerged in a dead silence. She turned on the lamp and started browsing through the fashion magazines her mother had brought. When she looked at the clock, it was already past midnight.
Today has been an awful day. A lot of things happened that I don't ever want to remember again.
She didn't feel pain and had stopped vomiting once and for all for a while already. But that weight that had landed in her chest gave no signs of wanting to leave.
I must stop thinking about it.
She muttered to herself, reaching a hand to switch off the light. It was then that the cure, which up to that moment had remained curled up near her pillow, leaped out of the bed and ran straight to the entrance of the room. She followed it with her eyes and saw it stop before the door, then turn towards her. The cure stayed there staring at her, as if trying to tell her something.
What is it?
She asked, knowing full well it wouldn't answer if not with a movement of its head. Resigned, she got out of the bed and approached the creature. No sooner had she reached it than the cure passed through the door in an instant and got out of her sight.
Don't tell me you want to play tag at this late hour of the night. What a spoiled rabbit. Doesn't it get how I'm feeling? All I want is to go to sleep and forget everything that happened today. And instead,
She opened the door and entered the corridor. The moonlight entering through the large windows seemed almost dazzling. At the end, she could see the corridor for traversing the building where the visitors and the seriously ill patients' wings were located. The cure awaited her there. Its white fur shone almost translucent under the moon's light. The gemstones of its ears and small paws, as well as of its head, shone in the shadow, spreading blue reflections. Coniglio approached, and again the cure, as if wanting to be chased after, fled to the end of the corridor and turned left. It was the hospital wing reserved for patients in critical conditions. The girl rushed straight to the small animal. Suddenly, a fresh scent of mint came to her nose.
this smell.
As if it had read her mind, the cure suddenly straightened up its big ears and seemed to fix its gaze in the darkness at the end of that corridor. Raising her gaze in the direction the small rabbit seemed to be pointing out, she made out the silhouette of a young man, faintly lit by the weak light of an emergency sign.
But that...
She was certain there was no mistake. It was the same person she had seen at the hotel. That hair which looked like it had been messed up by the wind, that somewhat ambiguous look. Seen from where Coniglio stood, with the faint hospital lights behind, he looked like a character from the Shadow Theater she had seen so many years ago on television. Yet his particularities had remained so imprinted in her mind that she had no doubts this was indeed him.
Why? What is he doing here?
In the moment that question took to cross her mind, the young man's shadow was already gone. She rushed to where she had seen him, but could no longer even find his shadow. The only trace he left behind was that kind of sweet smell of mint which refreshed her breath. Suddenly, the door behind her was loudly thrown open. It had been slammed open by a monster wearing striped pajamas and making a cry like that of the firefighter's siren mimicked by a small child. She couldn't make out if he had always been so fat, or if that unnatural swelling was caused by whatever evil assailed him. His body was covered in multiple large swellings. The hand with which he had tried to hold onto the door slipped, and the man fell heavily on the ground with a thud. On the door, where the hand had laid, were left dark streaks of his blood. That black imprint was like an alarm bell ringing as loud as it could in her brain.
Again! The same thing is happening again!
Coniglio got closer to try to help the man in pajamas get up, but he shook his head with his neck, just like how a baby would when trying to say no, and tried to stretch out of the floor where he started slamming his hands hard. 2, 3 times. Then there was a disturbing sound, and the man's right thumb literally exploded, splattering everything around. A fragment landed on Coniglio's face, just like how it had been with Winona. The black blood in contact with the air emanated purple vapors which quickly thinned out.
Mister, speak! What happened to you?
No sooner had she taken his shoulders to shake him than she heard a loud noise, like broken glass coming from the next room.
At the hotel, it was exactly the same thing. Here, too, something is attacking the patients.
It was her second time going through this, so she didn't hesitate. She pushed the cure, which she had been hugging close to her chest, towards the man's feet, and raced to see what was going on in the other room. Thankfully, the number of patients hospitalized in critical condition in that wing was not high. 5 in 3 rooms. The man in pajamas from just now, an old man with plenty of tubes coming from all over his body, with a woman who was assisting him. And in the next room, 2 girls still at an early age. All had succumbed to the same symptoms. The unpleasant sweet smell of rotting fruit, hands and feet bloated and covered in swellings, bluish black liquid oozing from several parts of the body. All were screaming in terrible inhuman screeches, and feverishly scratched themselves only to have their skin torn away, leaving on display the already rotting flesh which pulsed underneath.
At the hotel. Yes, with Winona, it was exactly the same thing.
She returned to the man in pajamas. He was still a bit in pain, but the cure seemed to have finished sucking out the toxins. His appearance had mostly returned to normal. He was left with some excoriations on his face, but the worst was over.
This one's next.
Coniglio prompted the cure, seeing that the old man was in critical condition. At those words, the small rabbit moved. It crossed the corridor and darted into the next room at a speed never seen before. The cure leaned its mouth directly over that of the old man's, who's, no longer able to stand the heat, was leaking sweat and nauseating liquids all over his body, and started leaching away his torment. The movement of his hand, up to which a moment ago had been violently hitting the bed, slowly calmed down while his labored breath also regained a normal rhythm. However, while busying over him, the woman beside, fallen near the bed, let out a wail and began crumbling away before their eyes. A pool of dark blood started spreading over the floor right below her. With the rush, Coniglio ended up with one of her slippers in it and wrist slipping.
Quickly! Quickly!
In return, the cure rushed over that third victim. Its speed in leaching seemed noticeably faster compared to that used in the man in pajamas.
If we keep going like this, maybe we'll save everyone. Actually, no, I'm sure. We'll save them all.
Coniglio, for the first time in her life, was trying to use to the utmost the gift she had been granted, and which from elementary school onwards had tried to keep hidden.